Happy Wednesday, everybody. I'm flying solo again today. Linda's fine, but just wanted to complete this section that we had in Patrick Madrid's book, Why Be Catholic? And we're on the sacrament of confession. And he has a very powerful real life situation that happened to him regarding this particular sacrament. So let me relate that to you. For me, the sacrament of confession is a huge part of my answer to the question, why be Catholic? When I have sinned, I know that Christ will forgive me if I ask him to, just as he healed the leper who implored his healing. This is going directly to God for forgiveness. Some people mistakenly imagine that Catholics go to the priest instead of going to God. Just as the leper approached Christ directly, so does the Catholic in confession approach God directly for forgiveness. But just as Christ, upon healing him, commanded the leper to go into the city to show himself to the priest, and then perform the sacrifice prescribed by the law of Moses, so too he commands Christians to do likewise in the sacrament of confession. There we reveal our souls to the priest, so that he can pronounce definitively what God has done by forgiving us. In the case of serious sin, we are thereby restored to our rightful unity with the rest of the body of Christ. To illustrate what I mean by that, let me tell you a true story that happened to me. During the lunch break at a large Catholic conference where I was speaking, I was at my table signing books and chatting with attendees. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed an attractive woman in her late 30s standing off to my left. Her body language was stiff and closed off, her arms clasped firmly over her chest. She was frowning at the other people. She was frowning at my books, and she was frowning at me. I turned to her with a smile and a cheery hello, completely unprepared for her reaction. She practically bit my head off. In fact, if looks could kill, I would have been a dead man. Staring at me acidly, she said, "Don't even try it." I blinked, flummoxed by her antagonism. Don't try what? "Don't try to convert me to the Catholic Church," she snapped, pressing her arms more tightly against her chest, her pursed lips a horizon of anger. "I know that's what you do. You try to convince people to become Catholic, but it won't work with me. I hate the Catholic Church. I used to be Catholic, but I left a long time ago when I became a Bible-believing Christian. So don't start up with me about Catholicism. Understand?" Wow. Why is she so angry? I wondered. Should I even bother trying to talk to her? Why not just shrug and walk away? I was tempted to say, "Okay, no problem, have a nice life." But my curiosity got the better of me. Something in her defiant look made me want to stand my ground. It was probably my pride. How could I walk away from someone who challenged me so openly and so rudely? No, I decided I'll press a little further and see what happens. "Oh, really?" I said, arching my eyebrows. "You hate the Catholic Church? Why is that?" How much time do you have?" she said sarcastically, her eyes flashing with anger. "All the time you need," I said, with a subtle undertone of some sarcasm. I remember mentally rubbing my hands together and thinking, this should be good. "All right," she began vehemently. "Since you asked, I hate the Catholic Church because it teaches so many unbiblical doctrines about Mary and salvation and the Pope and things like that. Because the Catholic Church adds in traditions of men to the Bible, teaching people to believe things Jesus did not teach. Because it keeps people in bondage, thinking they can earn their salvation. Because you Catholics worship Mary, and you worship the wafer. Those things go against the Bible." Her voice was rising now, as she warmed up to the task. Truth be told, the mercury in my own emotional thermometer was rising too. Her strident tone and the just plain dumb claims she was espousing about the Catholic Church were making me angry and defensive. I'd actually stopped listening to her and was really just waiting for her to stop talking so I could retort. This, by the way, is a very bad thing to have happen in any conversation. When you stop listening and are just waiting for the other person to shut up so you can fire back, you're arguing out of anger. As she talked, I reached for my Bible, getting ready to crush her arguments against the Catholic Church. It was like a scene from one of those westerns in which two tough guys are about to have a shootout at high noon in the middle of the main street. They throw back their jackets to reveal their six-shooters, their fingers tapping nervously on the handles as each waits for that moment when he must draw and fire. I'm embarrassed to admit, I felt a bit like that as I listened to her anti-Catholic tirade and reached for my Bible. Then, something odd and unexpected happened. When she had finished talking and was waiting for me to respond, expecting, I'm sure, that I would push back pretty hard, I felt an almost imperceptible intuition to be quiet. Was it a grace of God nudging me ever so slightly to keep my mouth closed? I don't know. It might have been. All I know is that I felt in that instant that I needed to remain silent. So I did. A few awkward moments passed as we looked at each other. She was waiting for my comeback, and I was waiting for something. I just didn't know what. She shook her head with a clear, "I don't know why I'm wasting my time with you" look on her face. "So anyway, those are some of the reasons why I don't like the Catholic Church," she trailed off. Still not sure what to say, or if I should say anything. Another long moment hung in the air awkwardly between us before I spoke up. I was surprised by how mildly, even gently, the words came out of my mouth. "You said you used to be Catholic. What happened? What made you leave?" It was as if the wind had suddenly gone out of her sails. I'm sure she was expecting me to let fly with biblical arguments about what she had just said about the Catholic Church. She obviously was surprised, and I'm sure relieved that I hadn't. "Well," she said, "it's a long story." "I have time." "All right, I'll tell you. My name's Susan, by the way." "Hi, Susan. I'm Patrick." We sat down at a lunch table out of earshot of the book browsers. She told me how she had been raised in a large, strict Catholic family. I remember her saying strict a couple of times, though she didn't ever explain what she meant by it. She went to Catholic grammar and high schools, and she said she just believed the Catholic Church's teachings without really questioning any of it. I just listened and nodded. Then she paused, took a deep breath, and started telling me about how, when she was 18, she and her boyfriend had become sexually intimate, and she eventually got pregnant. When I found out I was pregnant, I was devastated and scared, she said in a quiet voice. Her head was down, and she was staring at her hands. He wanted me to have an abortion. At this, she started to cry. Through her tears, she spoke of how alone and afraid she felt, not knowing whom she could turn to for advice and help. It was hard for her to talk. She told me that she felt she couldn't tell her parents. She was expecting a baby for fear that they would kick her out of the house and disown her. I couldn't confide in my relatives, she said, because I knew they would tell my parents. I was so scared. In a last-ditch effort to get some help, she went to a Catholic church across town, rang the rectory doorbell, and asked to speak to a priest. She had no appointment, but the secretary buzzed the intercom, and in a few minutes a priest came out to speak with her. She tearfully explained her predicament to him and said that her boyfriend, who was waiting for her outside in the car, had been pressuring her to have an abortion. But she didn't want to have an abortion, so she came to the rectory for advice and help. Amazingly, he was brusque and impatient with her and said something like, "Don't worry about it. These home pregnancy tests are often inaccurate. Take the test again in a few days. It's probably nothing. And by the way, I don't really have time to talk with you right now. I have other things I need to do." And with that, he dismissed her and walked back into his office. He didn't pray with her. He didn't counsel her. He didn't show any Christ-like concern for this poor young woman who was scared and alone and completely unsure what to do. The one person she turned to for help, a priest, brushed her off because he was too busy to care. She stumbled out of the rectory in tears. When I got into the car where my boyfriend was waiting for me, I told him what happened, and he repeated his demand that I get an abortion, she said. I didn't see any other choice. So he drove me down to the clinic, and I got it over with. By now, Susan was so overcome with emotion, she could no longer speak. She put her head down on the table and sobbed. The deep, wrenching sobs of a sorrow so painful, so profoundly desolating, that I could literally feel her aching as I sat there, saying nothing, just watching her cry. What could I say anyway? What could I possibly say that could alleviate her misery? I felt so utterly useless and inadequate as I sat there in an uncomfortable silence, waiting for her to start talking again. After what seemed like a very long time, but was probably no more than a minute or two, Susan had regained her composure enough to finish telling me what happened. After I had the abortion, I just hated myself, she whispered. I never told my parents, and I couldn't stand it. They didn't know what I had done to my baby. They thought I was still their good daughter. I couldn't live with myself. And I was so angry at that priest, she added. If only he had tried to help me. If only he had been willing to... She trailed off again, that anger having crept back into her eyes. Her bitterness was palpable. Then she said something truly amazing. More to herself than to me, she said flatly, and then I started to hate the Catholic Church. That priest represented the church in my mind. I was in this terrible situation because he wouldn't help me. The Catholic Church wouldn't help me. And every time I tried to go to Mass, I would get so furious I had to leave. So I stopped going. She added that her fundamentalist Protestant friends egged her on in this regard and encouraged her to leave the Catholic Church and join their fellowship, which she did. And for the next 20 years or so, she was bitterly anti-Catholic. Fast forward now to the two of us sitting together in an awkward silence at that table. I had absolutely no idea what to say, no clue what I could possibly offer her by way of advice or encouragement. As a man, I could only try to imagine the anguish that she, as a woman, must be feeling over her abortion. I knew I had to say something, but what? After another long, awkward pause, I blurted out the only thing that came to mind. You need to go to confession. The expression on Susan's face changed in a flash. Staring at me as if I had said, "Here, hold this rattlesnake." Her eyes flashed again in anger and disbelief. What? How dare you tell me, go to confession? Didn't you hear what I said? I hate the Catholic Church. There's no way I would ever go back. Yes, I said, floundering, but Jesus is waiting for you in the sacrament of confession. He wants to heal you. He can heal your wound from the abortion, but you need to go to him. Pushing the chair back, she rose abruptly. I'm sorry if I wasted your time with my story. I think I should go now. My heart fell. I knew I had blown it. Susan was obviously irritated again, with the Catholic Church, with me. She had opened up to me, a total stranger, with her deepest, most painful secret, and I had gone and said something oafish in response. You need to go to confession? Why had I said that? I kicked myself for bungling this, for not having had the presence of mind to come up with something more soothing and empathetic. I fumbled my way through an apology with the hope that she'd at least read a book or listen to a CD. She slung her purse over her shoulder with a look that said, "Well, that was a mistake." We shook hands politely and I wished her well. As Susan walked away, I mentally kicked myself again for having sabotaged the powerful breakthrough she had made with my inept comment about going to confession. I did my best to forget the whole thing and had pretty much succeeded until about 6 weeks later when I got an email from Susan. I gasped when I read her message. "Dear Patrick, you were right. I needed to go to confession." She related how my comment, "You need to go to confession," had so irritated her that she couldn't stop thinking about it. The more she thought about it, the more irritated she became. That thought, "I need to go to confession," even woke her up out of a sound sleep one night. Eventually, she explained, she got tired of fighting this thought that doggedly pursued her, and breaking down in prayer, she told God that if it was really Him telling her to go to confession, she would, but she still didn't like the Catholic Church. After making her decision, Susan went to a Catholic parish and made a good, sincere confession about the abortion and everything else on her heart. As she described it to me, it was as if the ice around her heart were melted by the warmth of God's grace, because she knew she had finally been forgiven. The ice melted. The dam broke, and all the toxic pain of her abortion began to leave her, and the healing could begin. Thanks be to God, not only did she come back to the Catholic Church, but she had her marriage blessed and was able to finally forgive the priest who had shunned her and resume a happy, sacramental life in the very church she had hated for so long, never realizing that it was not the Catholic Church that was the problem. There are countless stories like this of how Jesus Christ heals and transforms even the most hardened of sinners through the sacraments of the Catholic Church. These true stories of repentance and restoration have literally changed the course of history for the good through Christ's ministry of repentance, forgiveness, and hope through His church. I am grateful for these remedies for sin that are mine and yours in the sacraments. My advice to everyone, especially those whose troubled consciences nag them, is to return to the house of the Father and receive the many blessings He wants to bestow on them through the sacraments of the Church. In Matthew 11, verses 28 to 30, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy burdened and laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." We hope that if this has touched you in a special way as well, particularly if you've been away from the sacrament of reconciliation for a while, that you reconsider and make an appointment to talk to a Catholic priest or come to the confession. If you've been away for a while, though, I wouldn't advise going to the normal confession line. You may need a few more. You and the priest may both need a few more moments, which to really for you to make a good confession, and for the priest to help as well. Father Bellapede is available for appointments just for that purpose. You can call the parish office at any time to make an appointment to see him for that. And then we hold confessions immediately after the 9 a.m. Mass on Saturday mornings, and then on Saturday afternoon from 2:45 to 3:45. We hope you have a wonderful Wednesday. We look forward to seeing you again next week. God bless.